Hello, everybody. Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome to the Portland Cocktail Week. This is learning classes. We are here on behalf of Appleton Estate. I'm Monique Brackett, the Jamaican Rum Portfolio Ambassador for Appleton Estate and Ray & Nephew White Overproof Rum. I am so happy for this conversation today. So let's do some housekeeping before we start. We're on Instagram. You can find out what's coming up next there. So on Portland Cocktail Week, at PDXCW popped up right there. We're also posting these videos on YouTube too for the folks that aren't on Facebook. So you've got the YouTube link there to go back and view the videos, and all of the classes are archived there. So now that we've got that out of the way, one last thing. I definitely have to do this because it's my company. So you can also follow at Campari Community. It's going to pop up for you right there. Definitely follow us for all the Campari latest news and events. Bartenders, please, 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 you got to get on this. We've got some great stuff happening throughout the year, and you got to stay in the know, right? So now that we've got all of that housekeeping out of the way, I am so excited for this particular conversation. And I want to present and introduce my guest, and she's going to take us through Thoughtful Tropical today. Chockie Tom, all the way over on the other side of the pond. I tried to rhyme there.
Almost. It's still kind of close.
Welcome, Chockie. How are you, honey?
I'm good. 5 hours ahead, but doing pretty well.
Yeah. So for all of you who don't know, Chockie, where are you right now?
I'm in London. I am recently joined my husband in October. So we actually got married during the first lockdown. It's been quite the year for us. So.
Oh, that's beautiful. Congratulations.
So, it's been pretty interesting. So I joined him over here, but I've been in New York for the last couple decades, and I'm originally from Los Angeles.
Yes. So for those who don't know Chockie, and I'm sure there's a lot of people that do, but for those that don't, tell us who you are and your passion points, and then we're going to head into your class, which I'm so excited about.
So I am one of the co-founders of Doom Tiki, which I co-founded in July of 2019 with Austin Hartman. And we're a doom and stoner metal themed, non-appropriative tiki pop-up that looks to empower cultures rather than appropriate, and fundraise, as we like to call it, for various communities that are dealing with the generational after effects of colonization.
Well, as a Caribbean girl, I totally appreciate that. The heritage, we all know it, so we don't have to go there. So without further ado, let's head into your class because we've got a lot to cover. And for those of you who are online with us, feel free to pop your questions in the chat. We'll have a question and answer session at the end of Chockie's class.
All right. So today's class is called Thoughtful Tropical. And I made this pretty picture. So what is Thoughtful Tropical? So this is, pardon? Oh, okay. So what is Thoughtful Tropical? Basically, it's an approach to immersive and experiential bar concepts that combines cultural exchange and empowerment with non-harmful escapist ideals. And it's one philosophy on the way forward to do tiki-inspired drink programs. The other thing I'm going to say is currently, especially within the last year, there have been a lot of conversations discussing what the problematic parts of tiki are and other issues pertaining to that, and visibility for the Pacifica community. These have all been established, so we're not going to cover this part. But based on these conversations that are being led by Pacifica people and other parts of the industry, this is our response in a way that we're finding to move forward. So this isn't a class on the first part. There are lots of great references and articles. Please take the time to check them out. So why is there a need? So like we said, there have been lots of discussions and problems and things like that. And the other thing too is the cornerstone of hospitality for me personally is including and welcoming everybody. And we're also at a very important part of time in history where the need for inclusivity and diversity is a necessary conversation in every part of what we do in life, society, jobs, and everything else moving forward. So the other thing too is, as someone that's from Southern California, the whole kind of escapist notion of fake is something I'm familiar with. And when I was younger, I always thought that these words were really interesting. And as I got older, especially as I've kind of come to an understanding and found a balance with dealing with my family's indigenous background. This has been, I've had a lot of kind of inner conflicts about kind of balancing what I like about the escapism and aesthetics and vintage, style and everything with the problematic elements of the era. And also, the main thing being, if I'm escaping and I'm in paradise, I want this, but I don't want it to be at the expense of somebody else, particularly if it's somebody else that's rightfully from there, whose whole world has been turned upside down in order to create a paradise for outsiders. So escapism, awesome. Immersive concepts, great. Tropical cocktails, amazing. Rum, we all know the history of that, So it's a kind of, since we're going to be combining all of these things, there's got to be a way to do it differently. And there's got to be a way to do it in a way that doesn't make me feel weird or somebody else if I go into a bar and I'm looking at things that are like caricatures or that are really just reductive and dehumanizing for other cultures and things like that, and just, really kind of takes away. So in order to kind of get an understanding for why these changes I think are necessary, and even just understanding some of the lingo, we're going to be going through cultural appropriation, cultural appreciation, cultural exchange, and cultural empowerment. And a lot of these sound similar, or they look like almost the same thing, but there are subtle differences. And I think by kind of just getting an understanding of what these are, it'll give us more thoughtfulness in how we do things and give us some perspective that we might not have thought of. Pause for the questions that we're going to be going through. This is kind of a setup. And cultural appropriation. So I'm just going to read through these because every time I try to memorize them, it doesn't always come out so well for me, and I don't say it exactly the way I want to. So cultural appropriation refers to the use of objects or elements of a non-dominant culture in a way that doesn't respect their original meaning, give credit to their source, reinforces stereotypes, or contributes to oppression. The term cultural appropriation has been reduced to mere internet outrage and dismissed as a tool devised by the fun police or overly sensitive BIPOC to keep people from enjoying themselves. The reality is that cultural appropriation is a stain on American and European history. It's the manifestation of one of the earliest, most enduring racist ideals, the belief that people who belong to marginalized communities are somehow less than human. Once you've dehumanized someone, you can co-opt their culture with ease, take their language, dress and customs, and say that they aren't worthy of the respect that you reserve for your own culture. And here's how you identify it. In short, if your use of cultural items or practices exploits that culture in any way, you're appropriating, whether you realize it or not. Other markers of appropriation include presenting elements of a culture in ways that give a skewed or inaccurate perspective of that culture or reinforce stereotypes. It often seems that cultural appropriation is one of the most defended acts of racism. When someone is called out for cultural appropriation, the response can be a mixture of denial, entitlement, anger, and defensiveness. People become self-justifying in a way that is uncritical and ahistorical. And this, issues of cultural appropriation, of course, are very present in Tiki, in marketing. I mean, we have it in places, it's so ingrained into our experience that sometimes we don't even notice it. So cultural appreciation. Cultural appreciation involves a desire for knowledge and deeper understanding of a culture. People who truly want to appreciate a culture offer respect to members of that culture and their traditions by participating, but only when invited to do so. Cultural appreciation is when you earnestly seek to learn about or explore a different culture. Appreciation has you looking to others to guide the conversation. It keeps you clearly in the role of the student. Going directly to the source is best, as even academic research from outsiders can be problematic. And what I want to expand on that a little bit by just saying, like, a lot of people's knowledge of like different cultures comes from books or articles by anthropologists and archaeologists. And while there's some interesting insights, it's not the same thing as going to members of this culture that are open to it, because that's also important, is to make sure you have consent for this, to learn about it directly in a respectful way. So the difference, if there's double standard, if there's unequal exchange, if there are roots of oppression, then that is cultural theft, not cultural honor. Appreciation simply means expressing a willingness to learn and admire another culture without comparing or contrasting. We risk crossing over into appropriation territory when we apply our set of cultural standards and norms to another. You, as an outsider, don't get to decide how to honor another culture. And a good example of this is what I never thought I would actually see changed in my lifetime, but as someone that's Indigenous, the debate with certain problematic mascots, one of the main things that would always happen is people would say, well, this is how we're honoring you. And, reducing somebody down to a caricature and telling you that you're honoring us when you haven't asked us if that's how we want to be honored is just not okay. And you don't get to decide how to honor somebody. You have to ask them. So cultural exchange. Cultural exchange implies a mutual and beneficial sharing of cultures and beliefs, as well as a level power dynamic. One of the reasons that cultural appropriation is a hard concept to grasp for so many is that dominant cultures are used to presenting their own cultures onto others and taking what they want in return. We tend to think of this as cultural exchange when really it's no more than pressuring others to adapt to your ideals while stealing from their cultures. True cultural exchange is mutual, and by that, I mean there's consent and a truly equal power dynamic. So I think examples we can see of that is, a lot of times when places are colonized, everyone that's from there is expected to adapt, or when people come from different communities, there's like an expectation that they leave behind part of who their identities are and what their culture is in order to be more like everybody else. And with cultural exchange, you put an equal value into that, and you treat other people's cultures and customs and beliefs as just as important as yours, even though they're different. And it puts things on an equal power dynamic. So this brings me to the last part of this, which is cultural empowerment. And this seeks to juxtapose narratives, languages, and diverse cultural identities as part of a broad educational project that wishes to undermine the social divisions and classifications created by dominant and invasive cultures. The power dynamic between culture changes as well, especially in regards to defining your culture by your own terms. As we look to modernize Tiki for a more aware future, cultural empowerment is fundamental in creating a truly hospitable and diverse experience. So when we talk about empowerment, like, we want people to feel respected enough to share things the way that they want to. We want people to, respect that there are differences, and we want people to create the narratives about who they are, as opposed to having somebody else create it for them. So, and then when we talk about this too, if we don't discuss tokenism and cultural monoliths, I think we're leaving a big part out. And it's important to note that cultures don't exist in a vacuum. Individuals are not a monolithic representation of an entire culture and their opinions. Many times, well-meaning people struggling with their own appropriative behavior often turn to textbooks, Google, and online communities in search of a clear-cut answer. There isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. No one person can tell you what to do. Culture is not always a fixed or a rigid construct. So that means, especially in regards to the mascot thing I've discussed, a lot of times various news sources will find somebody that identifies as Indigenous and says, well, I don't really have an issue with this. And then that in turn becomes an entire, it becomes like they end up using this answer as a way to justify what they're doing. It's unfair to have one person represent everybody, because as different as me and you are, that's still true in different cultures, and that's true with all across humanity. So it's really a disservice to yourself, and it's a disservice to other communities if you're going to use one person as a monolith. And then tokenism happens when someone is viewed by a dominant majority group as a member of a minority group and put into a position to speak on behalf of all people from that group on various topics, which is very similar, but also we see this a lot when there's more attempts made at diversity. Simply having one person that's here as a representative is very different from, actually doing the work to learn more about this person. And, it takes more than having somebody to move things forward. It has to work both ways. You can't just have somebody there to look better if you're not trying to make things better in turn for everyone else. And my general rule, of course, to all of this is if you think something might be a problem, whether it comes to decor, branding, it probably is, and don't be an asshole about it. And that's just kind of like my basic ethos for everything that we do. All right. So what is Doom Tiki? So I went over a little bit about what it is. So again, we started this in 2019. This is our first flyer. We did it to benefit RACES, which is a great organization in Texas that helps with children that have been detained and separated from their families. And we wanted an opportunity to have a fun pop-up, do something good, and do it in a way that we think is an example of how to be more thoughtful and kind of do it through practice as opposed to just talking about it. Because you can talk about how to do things differently all day. You can talk about what things need to change, but until you actually do this, it's kind of pointless. So, when COVID happened, we created Doom Tiki, which takes bartenders from multiple cultural backgrounds and reimagines their traditional flavors and ingredients in the context of a tiki style drinks, while also creating cultural exchange and giving bartenders from the other cultures that are often reduced and misrepresented, a way to present culture in a way that, sorry, I always get really ahead of myself when I do these live things, so I'm gonna chill for a second. So pretty much, like when you're in a lot of restaurants, there are certain expectations because America, it's kind of in our culture to kind of reduce aesthetics, and, a lot of it isn't necessarily harmful, but it also causes us to miss out on a lot of other things that are in the same culture. So if you're going to a Mexican restaurant and you expect the same aesthetic, you expect the same decor, you expect to see murals of a a guy sleeping against a cactus in a serape, that doesn't tell you or show you like what other things there are to offer. And it is also harmful to kind of, continuously portray that. Or if you're going to go to an Indian restaurant, there's an expectation that everything's going to look one way and everything is going to have, a certain type of presentation. And, it kind of closes you off if you depend on that. So by allowing people to not only present flavors that are present, but to kind of use the experiential and immersive elements of Tiki to tell the story and to share, it's been a different way to do things. And then also, when we have people that participate, we have a few rules that we give them to kind of work off of. So that would be the next slide. So these are the rules. Be thoughtful. No mugs with bastardized versions of Pacific or indigenous idols or explicitly racist caricatures. Although, because my family is Pomo Indian from California and the missionaries were particularly harmful to us, and we're going with a satanic imagery kind of motif, I'm open to that. And then also one of the things I found, especially when I've done things like presented graphics with like a satanic rosary or stuff like that, it'll offend people that might not be offended by seeing, something that they hold sacred misrepresented. And they'll reach out to us and then we can have conversations like, hey, how you feel about this is how somebody from this community feels like when you drink out of a mug that looks like something that's ancestral and valuable to them. So on the one hand, there's like a kind of like, yeah, this is kind of upsetting. But on the other hand, it does create opportunity for dialogue and it helps people think more. And then we always tell people to learn about the people and the organization that we're raising money for. We've worked with organizations that do things for climate justice for Australian Aboriginal youth. We've worked with organizations that benefit Native Hawaiians that were dealing with issues of sacred land theft. We've raised money for legal funds for water protectors. And we've also raised money for like different environmental groups for like the Micronesian Climate Alliance. So, if you're going to participate and be part of this, sharing the information on why these organizations need to exist is really important. And then also, I think when you learn why these different people need help with these things, you can also learn more about the people themselves. And then also, one of the things that we embrace, especially with our programming, doing different cultural background cocktails, is don't limit yourself to just rum. Embrace diversity in spirits, especially since you're looking at Tiki as a made-up culture that's been taken from a lot of things. If we're gonna, fully embrace that, where you can create an experience taken from a lot of things, I think that should be reflected in spirits as well. And then we always assign people different doom metal albums and stuff like that. And we tell people to listen to the music for naming inspiration and we ask people to name things after the songs to avoid co-opting language and problematic imagery for drink names. Like if you're using a language from a culture where people were killed or punished or their children were beaten for speaking this language, it's not okay for you to come and decide that that's a word that you should have access to name drinks after. There's a deep history there and, there's significance there. And it's very just like, selfish and thoughtless to do that. And then things like the Vicious Virgin and Missionary's Downfall also, reference problematic elements of colonization, and they promote like bad stereotypes and things like that, like the available island maiden trope. And when we say sexually exploitive, a lot of the imagery we saw of like half-dressed Native women, a lot of them are very young, some of them not older than like 13 or 14, and we don't really want any part of that. So I know that over all the years, I've used lots of music to name cocktails after. This is a different way to do it. And also it encourages you to check out a different type of music. And then rather than worrying about recreating experience based on somewhere far away, embrace and share what you have and know. So if you're from one place and maybe there's one ingredient that's prominent in cuisine, things like that, sharing that and giving us some insight, especially with the different Zoom tikis that we've been doing, we're totally encouraging people to like go out and embrace that stuff. So if we go to the next slide, here are a few of the different Zoom tikis we've done. We did a Scandinavian one, and like different Scandinavian spirits were used. A lot of ingredients were foraged. When we did the Indian one, there were like different orgeats made from cashew, different spices used with like falernums and things like that. And then one of my favorite ones, I mean, not just because it's my favorite flyer that I've made, the Doom Tiki War Party, our guest bartender recreated his experience of being from Arizona and utilized like spirits from there and very kind of deserty kind of feeling things. So it was really interesting and very cool to see how people could take like traditional tiki blueprints, change the culture, change the dynamic, and present things in a different and fun way. And, it's been, I think, one of my favorite things about coming up with this project and then adapting it in a way online that, since we're not doing a cocktail pop-up anymore and we're having presentations, it's interesting to get different perspectives and different ideas and learn how different cultures might all use the same flavor. Because as much as it shows us how different, it also shows that like a lot of flavors have similar pairings, even if the ingredients are the same. So that's been one of the more beautiful things, I think, about this whole process. So these are some of the things. I found myself talking to a lot of bars and brands and even individuals about ways that they can apply what I've gone over and be more thoughtful. And these are just kind of the things that we've come up with and that I've told a lot of people. So creating an immersive bar experience doesn't have to mean taking from others. You have the tools and flavors already available, even if you haven't thought about applying it to tiki. So the ones that I showed previous, those were just some examples, but there's always more ways to do this. Hibiscus is a really good ingredient that's used across multiple cultures that just upon researching it, you might figure out a different twist to do on something cool, like one of my favorites, which is a jungle bird. Bars like Lost Lake and Charleave have managed to create cocktail-focused immersive bar experiences while avoiding the typical problematic and tired trappings. And that's the other thing too is, being a bartender is about innovation. And, it's nice to kind of freshen up and change things. And then bars such as the Inferno Room and Lackey Cane have worked with various Pacific communities to create respectful and education and authentic environments. And by that, they've reached out to people that make carvings or that do different types of decor. And they present these examples as a learning experience in addition to just being really nice decor. It's not simply about this kind of wood carved face that I have no idea where it's from, looks really cool, so I'm going to put it here because, it's what I'm going for. The thoughtfulness, I think, is really awesome, and I would love to see more of that. And next slide, please. So embrace change, whether in your ingredients or how my favorite bar, Trailer Happiness, has. There used to be a statue of a Polynesian woman that was completely inaccurate named Bianca. And, by removing this from part of the aesthetic, it shows a willing to change. And it's, I think, really nice to show, like, as things change, things that were okay, even if they weren't, but were acceptable, it's good to change with it. So rather than someone that's specific as seeing that they're going to a bar with a half-dressed, sexually suggestive version of themselves, their family, and everything else, it's a nice bar experience that doesn't make you feel awkward because, talking to people I know from these backgrounds, seeing yourself portrayed in a way like that can be uncomfortable, and it's not okay. And Trailer Happiness has also worked to redo the outside and use mugs that aren't offensive and are of other things, which I think is a really cool way to modernize and still really very much keep the vibe of the place. And if you like things about these cultures, learn about them, reach out respectfully. If you're earning money from creating an experience based on them, understand that a lot of them might not be here in 50 years due to climate issues, and give back. So, I think if you're going to profit from creating an experience of someone else's existence, especially since there are a lot of climate justice issues and environmental issues, I think giving back to these places is a great thing. And, there are bar programs that donate money towards different groups and have fundraisers and things like that. So these are just some of the ways that I've kind of advised people on, how to change their programs and how to be more thoughtful and how to make the experience much more welcoming. And my final thoughts, because this isn't a black or white issue, we can also hold on to many things, and we can appreciate what has drawn us to Tiki, but we can also understand that there are things that aren't good about it and move forward, at least in a bar and a cocktail sense. And then I just want people to ask, at the end of the day, is it more important to hold on what you like and know, or to create a more welcoming and thoughtful environment for everyone? Because isn't that what hospitality is about? Ideally, I hope that after studying this, you'll take the time to be more thoughtful and to use critical thinking when it comes to these things. Take time to educate yourself and listen, and to actually just be open to re-examining like the symbols that you use without thinking and the cultures you engage with without understanding them, and acknowledge that there is historical and social context there, and not everything can simply be like, can't we all get along? What might not be significant to you might be significant to someone else, and it's good to, find a place where we can both exist and be and educate and, have a good time with each other in a way that's thoughtful, I guess. And then we exist in an ever-changing time, so you can be part of the solution, which to me is embracing change and finding ways to share these things that's welcoming to everybody, or you can kind of get left behind, because at some point, the world changes. And as we see, like with different companies deciding that books that they might have been okay with are going to go out of circulation, or changing, brand mascots, or, changing sports mascots, the people that really want to hold on to that stuff are becoming less of the mainstream. And I think that that's a beautiful thing. And I believe that is everything.
Man, Chockie, you've dropped so many gems today. As a ambassador that works with a brands that are definitely from a strong cultural heritage, I so appreciate this conversation. We've got folks like Janae and Brittany Clark and Jazz Singh that are on here, and they're all like clapping like crazy for this conversation. Because I think, many times, especially when we get into the world of brands, we're so focused on the marketing side of things. And when we talk about creating bar experience, I think this is the time to also educate our consumer. And there's no better person to do that than the bartender who's serving that hospitality arm through a drink, and I think this is where the conversation can happen. You're either going to get on the train of talking about it now, or you're going to get left behind. And I agree with you on that. This is the time to have the conversations. You guys, it's looking on. I mean, shoot some questions, put some questions in here. While you're doing that, I wanted to kind of go back through some things that you said and just get a sense of what your ideas are for next steps. You know, like where do we go from here? And one of the things that I wrote down is how do we broach the conversation in terms of appreciation, you know, so that it doesn't feel offensive for someone who may not be comfortable immediately approaching it. How do you suggest that they can have that honest, non-offensive approach to it?
Well, I think one of the things that is important to note is that a lot of times, especially as I've done this work and I've interacted with the Tiki community beyond just hospitality, because, you know, in Europe, it's a hospitality thing. In the US, it's an entire lifestyle. But one of the biggest misconceptions I've had from my perspective was not seeing that a lot of people that were doing appropriative things thought that they were doing appreciation. So, you know, like a lot of times, sometimes it just takes a simple conversation, just being like, hey, this is, you know, like a weird sensitive subject and it's probably something you don't think about, but I noticed that you like these things, you know, maybe you should learn more. And if you like this representation, you know, find out more about, like, if you like this particular carving, find out where it came from, find out about the people that made it. Yeah. Find out like what life is like for them. And I think one of the biggest things is, especially with a whole cultural concept that's based on an era, like not realizing that, you know, treating people like living relics is kind of dehumanizing. So, you know, adding that humanity and culture that's very much vibrant and alive, I think, into people's like perception is very key to that.
Yeah, yeah. And how do you feel right now, especially with everything that's going on? You got this whole cancel culture that's happening, right? That immediately, as soon as something takes place, we're canceling out. Are you of the opinion that that's the approach, or do we talk about the history and then address it? What do you think is the appropriate thing when we're talking about cultural appropriation?
I'm a solutions person, and I think there are varying degrees of like what cultural appropriation is, from like just like people wearing headdresses to, you know, outdoor concerts being wrong and people knowing that and continuing to do that, to an organization I worked with here that's a children's theater program that was presenting something that they didn't think was that. You know, there's varying degrees of it, and it really just comes down to having the resources available, which is why I always like to share these presentations, because it's overwhelming to figure out how to have them, where to start, where to find resources on this thing. Yeah. But I think conversation and solution finding is fundamental. And you have to, like, just as I found that I made a lot of assumptions that were incorrect about, you know, Tiki lifestyle enthusiasts, you know, it's just as possible for people to be wrong about other things. And I've learned through this process, so other people can learn as well.
Yeah, yeah. We had a comment where someone said they're not appreciating the culture, they're appreciating the colonization of that culture. And I think that speaks volumes.
It does, because if your idea of paradise is being waited on hand and foot by available Native women, that's colonization cosplay. Like, that's not cool.
Correct.
You know, and a lot of people, since they don't have that in their history, they can't necessarily put themselves into that perspective. But I think, like, you know, one of the greatest disservices that the American educational system does is they don't actually give a full, real history of the United States. And as an adult, a lot of people have to go and search that kind of stuff out. So, you know, teaching people that things we did were wrong and recognizing that, and kind of coming full circle, and then giving the people that have had to deal with this a chance for visibility and to be heard is, I think, one of the best ways that we can move forward. I'm like, there isn't a one size fits all solution. If there was, I would be talking about that.
Correct. We'd be miles ahead of where we're talking about right now. So you're totally correct on that. One of the questions we've got from Erica Llanera is that what are some of the reputable sources to educate ourselves on the cultures that Tiki has been inspired by?
So I think one of the best things that I can recommend is the Pacifica Project, which was started by Sam Jimenez and Mariah Kunkel. And they have that's great for hospitality, that's Pacifica, but they have an incredible reading list that's been curated for culture and in regards to Tiki, and they're always working on cool projects and presentations. And, and then also looking up where things are from and finding like people online that are from these communities that are doing really cool stuff too. Like one of the things that's great about, as much as we're all isolated and as much as we've all been trapped in our homes, like because the way the world's wired now, it's not too hard to reach out and, find something and learn about something and kind of create an almost global classroom. And, there's talks all the time. There's different organizations you can look up. It's just taking the time and being thoughtful in how you want to appreciate things and how you want to approach things.
Exactly. I mean, we all, like you said, we all have the time. I think this is a moment where people kind of have to put the work in because unfortunately, the reverse is also offensive. Asking someone to guide you down that road is also seen as offensive. And I think that's something that we all have to be aware of. And I like this conversation because while we're talking specifically about Tiki, there's a broader spectrum, especially in the rum category, to this conversation. People from the islands definitely have felt certain, I would say certain thoughts or ideas when you visit there as a tourist and you don't really see how the local lives, but you hear the yeah man and you think that's like something that they're saying every single day, and that's typically not the case. So I think this is the time for everybody to do the work. I'm hoping that when we get back to traveling, that travel means something else, something new, something exploratory, instead of just going and laying on the beach.
Well, and I think also one of the important things, especially when you are visiting other communities, like people like to think of colonization as a historical one-time event, and that's not the case. It's felt for generations. So whether it's being portrayed incorrectly in media, whether it's having music and style co-opted but not welcoming the creators, whether it's creating an experience and sexualizing women in a way that doesn't involve consent or any of these other things, like, these are all modern things that stem from colonization and stuff like that.
That's right.
Being aware that a lot of these communities still deal with issues, and then also like a lot of times are forced to portray things in a way as a means of survival, because even tourism can have elements of this as well. So, I think one of the best examples I can give is that since most Tiki food is bastardized Cantonese food, a lot of Chinese restaurants were forced to adopt Tiki lounges and create, experiences. I mean, one, they should be cashing in on somebody selling their cuisine. And two, like, one of the things that makes me sad about that is that they were forced to use really racist mugs of themselves in order to survive in a world because they're different. So,
right.
Things need to be, acknowledged and explored and done differently.
Yeah. These are the small things that people don't realize is like sight unseen and unheard, small things that mean something to someone that for them, it's their livelihood. And so they can't sacrifice the livelihood to stand on a platform. So I really, really appreciate the voice that you're giving to this topic. at large, you're moving the dial. And I hope we're able to continue to have conversations like this. I'd love to see people want to come to the table and have the conversations. And I think folks like you and I have a great platform to do it. And I hope we get to continue on with this, not just this year. This is not a trend, people. You know, not a trend. And it definitely, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. So,
but I will say one thing though, is that I have noticed a change. I have noticed people being more thoughtful. I have noticed people tagging us in cocktails that they create or leading conversations that I've heard that are about things that I've brought up. And even just having brands and some historical bars, you know, reach out and be like, how can we do this in a way that isn't a problem anymore? It means that these conversations are working, and then to see that they're being led by the right people, which is the Pacifica community and other indigenous communities, you know, and seeing that people are now like listening to the people that they should have been and giving them the respect they deserve is what makes me hopeful about this. I mean, there's always going to be some pushback, you know, and people are going to feel like they're having something taken away. But if you think having to give up a lifestyle that you've chosen is taking away from something, imagine what that would be like if somebody's taking things that are actually part of who you are without asking.
Yeah. Well, for those of you who are definitely participating and moving the dial, we thank you. We thank you for taking the time to do that. We've got a comment from Catherine Schott who says, I've learned a lot by listening. Thank you for being open and educating and sharing. And Catherine, thank you for taking the time to join us today to hear this conversation. So definitely, this was a great conversation. For those of you who want to continue to have the conversation, you can always reach out to Chockie on Instagram. We're going to put up her Instagram
that's my personal
handle, right? So you've got at Chalktails here. Galen Rose, glad I tuned into this one. Thanks for the thoughtful conversation. Thank you for tuning in, Galen. Thank you for tuning in, Allison. Well said and done to both of you. Thank you so much for joining in, everyone. Let me just say some ending words here. Again, this is not a conversation that's just a trend. We're moving the dial. And when we come together as one community, one bartending community, when we come together, we can make that change. So I want to say thank you again to all of you who have joined us. Remember to continue to follow us on Instagram, on YouTube. We're going to have the pop-ups here so that you can make note of it. We definitely will have more classes like this that will be featuring Appleton Estate and Moran Nephew. These are brands that I think definitely we want to lift up these conversations on the shoulder of brands with such great initiative and heritage. Thank you again to Portland Cocktail Week for hosting us, Campari community, and I thank everybody again for joining us. Thank you, Chockie Tom, and I really want us to keep in contact. We got to do some things, sister.
Well, I guess we'll just have to do a Jamaican Doom Tiki, right?
That's right. That's right. Gotta come and see you in London.
Oh, I can't think of anything that would be terrible. No, it'll be great.
Yes, yes. Well, enjoy your evening because you're about to be in the evening, and we will see everyone soon. Thank you, and shout out to everyone for joining us again.